Okay, everybody, welcome back. So as you can see here, I got my headphones on, and in this section, we are going to start creating our drum track using the loops that come with your PreSonus Studio One Artist package. So let's talk about that for a second. We talk about drums. Now, there's a few ways you can create drums, and for this series, I want to make this as easy as possible so you can get up and recording music very, very quickly. And the easiest way to do that is to add loops, use the included loops that come with Studio One. So the way we do that is we come over here to the bottom to our Browse button here, and we want to navigate over to our Loops tab. And in the Loops tab, as we looked about a few sections earlier, you can see that there's all kinds of loops based on style of music. So we have blues, classical, dubstep, EMD. You could go down the list. For example, if we open the blues folder, we have a bunch of drum loops, guitar loops, organ loops. Now you can build an entire song just using loops, right? But in this series, we're just going to do it with drums. And then in future sections, we're going to record guitars, acoustic, electric, and some bass and some keyboards with a MIDI controller. Okay, so for drums, if we open up our drums folder, here are the loops that come with Studio One Artist. Now, there are many, just do a Google search, third-party, software companies that sell different types of drum loops that you can buy, audio files that you can use with Studio One Artist, and also PreSonus carries them, so that you're not just limited to what you have here. There are many loops that you could go out on the market and you can purchase. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is you can use the VST instrument called Impact, which is in our PreSonus folder here as well. And that's a little bit more involved. You hook it up to a MIDI controller and you can tap out the beats that you want. That's usually pretty cumbersome for someone who's new to recording. They don't want to have to create their own drum parts. They kind of want to have a drummer already kind of set up for them in most cases. But that is another way to do it. And again, you can look out on the PreSonus website. They got some tutorials on how to use Impact and use the drum feature in that way. But we're going to use the loops. The third way to do it, if you didn't want to use the loops or you didn't want to buy third-party loops and you want something with a little more customization, something that's a little bit easier to use where you can construct entire songs very, very quickly, is you can get a third-party virtual instrument called EZdrummer 2. And I recommend this to a lot of my students. Yes, you have to go out and purchase it. Let me preface this by saying you don't need this. When you first get your package, we're going to use the loops, but I just want to show this to you as something that at one point you may want to upgrade to if you work with a lot of drums and you like creating your own drum parts. The website is tunetracks.com. EZdrummer 2, they have a demo. You can try it, I think, for 2 weeks. I think the program's $150. And is by far the easiest drum creation songwriting tool you'll possibly find as of the recording of this video, which is around, in the middle of 2018. There are several videos on my YouTube channel at Home Recording Made Easy out on YouTube that show you how to use this in depth. There's also tons of tutorials on the TuneTracks website, so you can always check that out as well. Now, in order to use a third-party VST with Studio One Artist, if you remember earlier on in this series, I said you need to buy, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, the way that you can use third-party plugins or VST instruments with Studio One Artist is you can buy what's called the Artist Booster Pack, which is here on the PreSonus website for $99. Okay, that'll allow you to not only use third-party plugins and instruments, VSTs, like EZdrummer, but you can also use a whole bunch of other things as well. And this will help take your Studio One Artist software, which is a little bit limiting, and expand it so you have more possibilities. Or you could always upgrade from Artist to the professional version for a little bit more money, and then you're going to get the mastering suite and some of the other things that we talked about earlier. Okay, so if you don't get the booster pack, you can't use EZdrummer or any other third-party plugin or instrument. So just keep that in mind. But I just want to show this to you. I just want to tell you about it if you don't know about it, because it's super, super simple to write drum parts, and it's not as limiting as what we're going to do here. Okay, so let me just minimize this. But for our example, we want to get up and doing something pretty easy, right? So if we come to the blues folder here under drums, they have a bunch of different audio wave files here, loops, right? We have a funk soul drum kit, A1, A2, A3, A4, A5. We have an ending to the song, and we have an intro. So we're going to use this to build a short little piece of music. So as I said earlier, you can always come down and you can preview, listen to and preview each loop right in the browser before you commit to your Studio One session. So for example, we're going to start with an intro, right? Makes sense. So we're going to come down to this funk soul drum intro. And if we want to learn a little bit more about the audio loop, it's right down here at the bottom of the browser. It's a funk soul drum loop, intro 1. 44.1 kilohertz, 24-bit stereo. It's an audio loop. It's 7 seconds long, a little bit more. It's at 130 beats per minute. Okay, and you can see my tempo down here in our session. In the transport, I changed from 120 to 130, and I'm going to show you how you can change the tempo of the loop. But let's just take this and left click, and let's just drag this onto our edit screen, and it's automatically, all the way at the beginning, it's automatically going to create a track for us here, okay? And we could double click right in here if we wanted to change the name, and we could just call this drums to make it easy. Okay, now if I expand this a little bit so you can see it, here is our intro at 130 beats a minute. If we play it back, there's our intro, okay? Now, let's say you didn't want to keep it at 130 beats a minute. Let's say that was a little too fast for you or a little too slow for you. You can change the tempo, but before I show you how to do that, I want to preface that by saying when audio loops and tempos, you want to be careful. You don't want to take something that's 130 beats a minute and make it 70 beats a minute. It's going to sound really, really kind of strange. You want to be within 5-10 beats per minute at most. But let me show you how to do that. So it's at 130 is what the loop was recorded at. If you come over here to the inspector, remember the inspector a couple of sections ago in the top left-hand corner of the screen here, and we click on that. This will give us the information about the track that we have here, in this case, our drum track. See where it says tempo up here and it defaults to follow? Now we could go ahead, we could make it don't follow, means that no matter what the tempo says here, it's going to stay at 130 beats a minute. So if I were to change this to say 100, down here in the transport, and play back the loop, okay, it sounds the same as it did before. It's still at 130 beats a minute. Why? Because on the tempo, I said don't follow the tempo, meaning don't have the loop follow what I put down here in the tempo and the transport. Now let's say I wanted to change that to follow. Now listen to what happens. Same thing, right? So it's not follow, but if I go to time stretch, watch what happens to the audio on the screen. See how the loop stretched? Okay, I'm gonna go back to don't follow. See how it shrank? Time stretch. Okay, it expanded the loop because I slowed down the tempo. Now let's close the browser here. Now listen to what this sounds like. Okay, so that sounds okay. So you can stretch this a little bit, but you want to be careful with drum loops because if you stretch them too much, it's going to sound like you stretched them. Okay, so what you want to try to do, we'll put it back to 130, which is the original. You want to try to find a loop that's somewhere in the tempo that you kind of have your idea for your song in. And this is where the loops could come a little bit limiting if you don't have a large loop library. But as I said a few minutes ago, you can purchase loops all over the internet for real inexpensive and have a cajillion options to you. Or you could get to something like Easy Drummer, like I said a bit earlier, and that's going to give you all the flexibility you want, and it'll give you enough ideas for the rest of your life. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind. So again, for this example, we're going to say don't follow. We're going to keep it at 130 beats a minute, okay? And now we got our intro. So now we want to get a verse. So let's get a verse here. Let's see what we got here. So let's just pick this first one. We have A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, which is probably going to be some different variations of this drum beat. Let's listen to A1. Okay, so that's our first drum beat, and you can see down here in the transport in the browser window, I can loop that around. So you can use the little loop button to continually loop that in the preview window. So let's say you're writing a song, you have your guitar in your hand, and before you commit to that drum beat, you want to kind of work out something like a little part on your guitar. You could just continually loop that as you're working out your ideas. So we're going to take that. So let's just say, yeah, we'll take that as our first one. And we're just going to take it, I'm going to drag it, I'm going to put it right up against the intro. Okay. Now this is where it's real important to keep your snapping feature on, so you could snap everything right to the grid. And if I expand this out a little bit, let me just show you. We just want to butt right up against it. Okay, so when we play these two sections back to back, let's see how they sound. Okay, seamless, right? So that's important. You want to butt them up against each other on the grid, and you want to keep your snapping feature on. Now, the one thing I want to mention to you, you probably see me doing a lot of this, zooming in and zooming out very quickly, which you're going to do a lot of, and I'll try to remember to do this more and more as we go through the series, shortcuts. On your keyboard, the W key is going to zoom out, and the E key, the letter E as in Edward, is going to zoom in. And you're going to use those all the time as well. It's much easier than doing it down here with this little slider. Down here in the right hand corner, you could zoom in and out with your mouse, but that's a little bit, takes a little longer. So I use the W to, or excuse me, the E to zoom out, or zoom in, the W to zoom out. Okay, so now we have our intro and our verse. So let's go down to maybe one of these other samples here, and let's just see if that changes the beat. So we went from A1, which was this. Now let's go to A5, see what that does. Okay, so it's a little bit busier. Sounds it could be like a bridge section or maybe a chorus section. Let's go to A4. Maybe we don't want something that busy. Okay, let's try A3 and see what we have there. Okay, so the drum fill at the end of that is a little bit different. So let's go ahead and let's just take that one and let's butt this up right up against this last one. Okay, and we could play this back right from our browser. We can just hit our space bar, by the way. We'll start and stop Studio One if you don't want to click down in the transport with your mouse. So the space bar is another one of those shortcut keys you're going to use all day, every day. So here we go. So here we are. We'll start at the beginning of our loop. We'll play these two sections back to back. I'll close the browser so you can see this a little better. Okay, now you can see that kind of had a little skip in it, right? So we want to go ahead and let's put our playhead. Let's just click with our mouse on our timeline. Let's zoom in a little bit. Okay, we can see I didn't line this up perfectly. I did that on purpose. I wanted to show you that. You just left click and drag it. Okay, we want to make sure we're right at the end of the loop. So by using the E key, okay, there we go. So by using the E key, we can zoom in very, very close and make sure we got everything lined up the way we want to. You don't want the loops to overlap. So now let's just kind of back up a little bit and let's make sure that that's a seamless transition. Okay, there you go. That's how you kind of line things up. Now, one thing I want to tell you about again, though, the shortcut key As you start building your drum track, or as you start doing any kind of recording and doing things, as a habit, we know that in the beginning when we set up our Studio One, way back in an earlier section, we talked about turning on autosave, and it saves every 2 minutes, whether you save or not. But I'm telling you, as one professional musician to another, you want to be saving as much as possible. And you're just going to get into the habit where on a Mac, it's the Command key. On a Windows PC, it's the Windows key. And hit the S, Command Save. I do Command Save all the time as much as possible. I want to save stuff. Every time I do a little bit of work, I'm always doing Command Save. It's almost like second nature. It just happens without without me even thinking about it. Something you may want to, consider doing for yourself. I highly recommend that. Okay, so now we have an intro. We have a verse section, maybe another verse section. Now let's go one more. Let's do one more beat here. Let's go to our more busy beat here. Maybe it was A4. Let's preview A4. Okay, so that could be like kind of a funky chorus section. So let's take that, let's drag that in. Okay, let's make sure we butt it up. And again, if you want to make sure if you're butted right up against it, the two pieces together, use the E on your keyboard, zoom out. You can see that when I zoom out, I didn't move it over far enough. Now, if you when I zoom in, when you zoom out, it looks like it's right up against it. But by zooming in, you'll see it's not right up against it. And we want to make sure that we do that. So just left click and just drag it over, and you can see it's snapping to the grid. And there we go. Now one last part here. I think I saw an ending as part of our loops. So let's drag this over here. Let's go to our ending. Here's let's see. Intro, end. So we have an end loop. Let's hear what that sounds like. Well, all right. There's our ends to our song. Let's take that, let's drag that on here as well. And again, we can zoom in and we can see that I need to make sure that's butt up correctly. So go right to the ends. Oops, I want to change the volume. Okay, over, and there we go. So now we have something that's a little over a minute. I know it's not an entire song, but it doesn't need to be for this test, right? So let's take a listen to what we have from beginning to end. Now again, Command Save or Windows key S, Command S, save that puppy. Let's play back and hear our little drum track that we're going to eventually put some guitars and bass and keyboards to. Spacebar stops the playhead, and there is your drum track. It's that simple to build a drum beat or a drum track with using loops. It's just drop or drag and drop right onto your timeline. So now, once you have this kind of at this space, you can see if I highlight, we have several loops that we piece together. What do we piece? 5 loops together. Now, one thing I like to do, and again, you don't have to do this, but I don't like having 5 of them together because they can be very easily misaligned. You can move them out of place if once you butt them up together and you have everything sounding good. I like to do is what I want to consolidate this to one event. So it's one seamless piece of audio. Some people call it consolidate. Studio One calls it bouncing. The way you do that is you just left click your mouse and drag over the entire 5 events, and you'll see they're all highlighted. And the shortcut for this is the Command or Windows key and the letter B for boy, right? Bounce to one audio. Let me undo that. Okay, so once again, that's Command or Windows, B as in boy. Oops. There we go. It's going to bounce the selection. It's usually instantaneous, but I did it and undid it a couple of times, so it might be Studio One might be thinking about it for a second. Or an easier way to do it is highlight all the tracks. You can also right click and you say where it says bounce selection, Command B, and there it goes. Okay, so now it's one solid piece of audio and not 5 different little pieces that can be disjointed from each other. Okay, so if we play it back, you'll hear it. Okay, one solid piece of audio. Now if I undo that, Command Z, or undo, edit, undo, you can bring it back to this section here. And I want to show you one last thing here. We talked about the arranger track in one of the last sections. If I click on this thing next to the flag here, open arranger track, okay? And what I want to do, and I think we talked about, where let's say we have our intro, we have our verse, our verse section, our chorus section, and our ending, right? The 5 sections to our song. Let's say we wanted to label those so we can easily see them on the screen. There's a couple of ways you can do this. For the arranger track, you take your pencil tool, as we talked about, and I can just draw in intro, release the mouse button. I'm just left clicking with the mouse and dragging. Now let's say that this section here is, the next section is our verse. Left click, drag, and I'm going to do that all the way to the second one because the first 2 are verses. I'm going to scroll over. This is going to be our chorus section. I'm going to release the mouse. Going to do it again. Here's our chorus. And then the last section is our ending. Now they're going to call it bridge, but if I go back to my arrow tool or number 1 on my keyboard, I can click right where it says bridge. Let's see, we want to zoom out. You can right click on the word bridge and see where it says bridge here. I can left click in that little, double click into where it says bridge, and I can just call this ending. Okay, and now I change it to ending. Okay, so once again, to do that, in case you missed it, highlight the part in the arranger track that you want to change. I'm on the ending. I'm going to right click. Okay. I'm going to double left click in the title bar and I'm going to change it there. And then I'm just going to hit enter, and now that's the ending. So now we have our song labeled with the arranger track, intro, verse. Verse is 2 separate blocks, right? We went verse, verse, chorus, ending. Now if I want to go ahead and I want to bounce this to one block of audio, let's see what happens. I'm going to right click. I'm going to go bounce selection, and now it's one piece of audio. It's one piece of audio, but because you have the arranger track open, you can see where the intro ends and the verse starts, and then where the verse ends and the chorus starts. And this is very helpful when you're trying to record music. Like when you're trying to record to this drum track your guitar parts and you're not sure, you don't have to count in your head necessarily how many beats and measures before I get from the intro to the verse. You can visually see it on the screen as the playhead scrolls across the audio. See, that makes sense? Another way you can do this without using the arranger track, and then we'll end this section. Let me do Command Z and make this 5 sets of blocks of audio loops, right? You could color code these as different colors. Now remember, we talked about if you wanted to change the color of a track, you come over here to the left-hand side where it's blue, and I can make this purple. But look what happens. It changes all the audio loops to purple as well. Here's a little trick for you. Let's say the intro is going to be purple. Let's say we want the verse to be a different color so we could see it a little bit easier. Once again, I can highlight it and right-click. I can change the name here by left-clicking in here, and I can call this verse if I want. Or I can left click on this purple color here, and my palette, my color palette comes up. Let's say I want to make that blue. Now my verse is blue. And then if I want to make my second verse the same color because I want to be able to visually see it better, I can make it blue. And now I have my intro is purple, my verses are blue, and let's say I want to make my chorus yellow. So I'm going to right click on it. First, I'll back up. I'm going to left click, highlight the audio loop, then right click, then left click on the color. I'm going to make my choruses yellow. and then I'm going to let my ending be purple. So now, in addition to having the arranger track, I also have a color-coded scheme to help me, to keep me in my right place as I'm navigating and recording my parts. Okay, I do this all the time. Now, the one downside to doing it this way is now you can't bounce the selection, because if you bounce the selection to one piece of audio, it's only going to be one color, and I'm going to show you. The only reason why you could keep this 5 different colors or 4 different colors is because we have 4 separate events. But now that I highlighted them all, I'm going to right click and I'm going to bounce. See how it changes to purple? It's always going to change to the color of the track that we chose over here on the left hand side. Okay, so those are a few different options on how you can, and it's very helpful. You want some way to be able to guide you through the song so you don't have to keep tracking your mind when you're playing your first, let's say, electric guitar track and you have no other instruments but drums, to have to sing the song in your head or keep time with when the parts change. You can use these visual cues to help you in the recording process. Okay, so that is how we easily create a drum track in Studio One using loops. Again, keep in mind, you can always go out and purchase third-party loops, and or you can get third-party VST instruments like Easy Drummer, but you have to have the booster pack with the artist version of Studio One. Or if you upgrade to the professional version, you don't need any other additional booster packs. With professional, you can do all the third-party stuff. Okay, so now come on back for the next section, and we're going to lay down our first guitar track here with our audio box. I'm going to show you how to set levels and do all that stuff. So come on back for the next section.